The fatal flaw in argumentation ethics, the pacifist trap. Argumentation ethics claims that certain moral rules are performatively contradicted the moment you argue against them. Libertarians use this to say that anyone who argues must already be committed to non-aggression, and therefore libertarian property norms are justified by the very act of speaking. But here is the problem. The entire argument hinges on an arbitrary choice of evaluative criterion. If you slice up the strategy space differently, the whole framework collapses, and you can even turn it back on libertarians themselves. Let me show you how. Suppose I define the moral axis not as aggression versus non-aggression, but as force versus non-force. Under this criterion, libertarian self-defense is no longer a pure principle. It becomes a mixed strategy. Force is prohibited in some cases but permitted in others. Now watch what happens. Using the exact same logic as argumentation ethics, I can accuse the libertarian of a performative contradiction. They argue while implicitly presupposing a norm of non-force, because argumentation is peaceful, and yet they endorse force in some circumstances. Therefore, the only consistent position under this chosen criterion would be pacifism. Of course, libertarians would reject this immediately. And they would be right to, because nothing about argumentation logically implies pacifism. But that is exactly the point. Nothing about argumentation logically implies libertarianism either. Both conclusions are created by the partition you choose. Change the evaluative criterion, and the performative contradiction disappears or reverses. The inconsistency was never in the behavior, it was in the way you framed the behavior. Argumentation ethics looks powerful until you realize you can plug in any axis you want and get whatever ethic you want. You can prove utilitarianism, pacifism, authoritarianism, anything, just by slicing the strategy space differently. And once you notice this, the whole structure collapses. Argumentation ethics doesn't derive a moral principle, it merely projects one. That's the pacifist trap, and it reveals the fatal flaw.